Something changed in you this week. You felt it. Not because of some big moment, there wasn't one. Just a quiet internal shift. The kind where a decision that had been floating around for weeks finally stops floating. It lands, settles, and after that, everything you do starts feeling slightly off because you're still playing a version of yourself that decision no longer belongs to. The people around you haven't clocked it yet. You've been letting them not clock it, still giving them the same answers, the same energy, the same version of the story, partly because the moment to stop and say, actually, something changed, just hasn't quite arrived, partly because, honestly, it's easier. For now. But tonight, for now, runs out. At 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the full moon in Libra hits exact opposition to the Sun and Saturn in Aries. And the gap between who you've actually become and who you've still been showing up as becomes impossible to maintain. Not for everyone around you, for you, fully, clearly, all at once. Libra is who you are for people. Aries is who you are when nobody's watching. Those two versions had been coexisting without too much friction for the past several days. Tonight, they're face to face. And the distance between them isn't background noise anymore, it's the entire room. No comfortable third option saves you from this. No clever framing that lets you keep both balls in the air. Whatever you've been holding together through sheer refusal to fully commit, it comes apart tonight into one direction or the other. Both clearly visible, both completely real, nothing left to hide behind. That's new. And it matters more than it might feel like right now. Here's the thing about internal shifts. They always happen before anything on the outside moves. Always. The interior reorganizes first. The exterior catches up later. Sometimes much later. This past week, yours reorganized. Something you'd been circling quietly made a decision on its own. A dynamic in a close relationship finally got a name. Not a confrontation, just a name. And an internal floor you'd been standing on, the one labeled, "This is fine," moved just enough that it doesn't hold the same weight anymore. And then you went about your day as if none of that had happened. Of course you did. You answered messages, showed up to conversations, met expectations. Not because you were being dishonest. It wasn't that. You just hadn't reached the point yet where keeping the act going was harder than dropping it. So you managed the gap, kept the distance between who you've become and who they still see from becoming too visible. That management is active work, though. Every softened message that wanted to be direct, every expected answer given instead of the real one, every time you stayed inside a pattern that no longer fits, that takes something from you. It costs. And by tonight, that account is empty. The heaviness since this morning, that thing that isn't quite anxiety and isn't quite exhaustion, that's not a mood. That's two incompatible versions of yourself trying to share one body and one schedule. The full moon has been closing toward exact opposition all day. Moon at 12 degrees Libra, Sun and Saturn at 12 degrees Aries. At 10:11 p.m., the gap between them hits zero, and the whole structure becomes fully, simultaneously visible, not for them, for you. To understand why tonight is actually a turning point and not just another hard stretch of internal noise, you have to see what this past week quietly built. Because going back was already structurally impossible before tonight arrived. The full moon didn't create any of this. It just turned the lights on. 7 days ago, March 25th, the Sun met Saturn in exact conjunction in Aries. When two planets align at the same degree, the slower one loses all ambiguity. Its function becomes sharp and unavoidable. Saturn's function is always the same thing, what's actually real. Not the more comfortable version, not the one that still leaves room for wishful thinking. What actually is. That day didn't produce anything you could point to. No scene, no obvious event. But something that had been parked in, still figuring it out, quietly moved. Not because you pushed it. Because the gap between what was real and what you'd been calling acceptable suddenly became too wide to paper over. A decision stopped being undecided. That was step one. March 26th, Venus moved over Chiron at 25 degrees Aries. If you're not familiar with Chiron, it marks the places where you got hurt and then built your entire way of relating around the hurt instead of through it. The spots where "I can handle this, it's fine" became the coping mechanism, and the coping mechanism became the whole pattern. Venus over that point pulled one of your current relationships directly into contact with exactly that territory, not as a vague theme, specifically. One person, one dynamic, the thing you've been tolerating that you know, if you were being genuinely straight with yourself, you would not still be tolerating. Venus Chiron didn't hand you a new wound. It gave a name to one that's been running quietly in the background for a while. Step 2, March 28th. Saturn formed a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius. Quiet transit. Sextiles rarely announce themselves, but what it did was take the decision from the 25th and the relational clarity from the 26th and pour concrete around them. Give them permanent structure. Pluto doesn't return what it processes. What moved into its orbit on the 28th doesn't come back out unchanged. Step 3, March 30th. Venus entered Taurus. This is the one that looks minor on a transit list and completely isn't. Venus in Taurus doesn't push or accelerate. It roots, settles. And Taurus, once it knows what it wants, does not negotiate. When Venus moved into that sign 2 days ago, everything that had been forming all week, the new limits, the new desires, the new sense of what you will and won't accept, stopped being a direction you were trending toward. It became the actual position. 2 weeks ago, there was still flex in you. Not without cost, but the flexibility was there. Today it isn't. Not because you made some dramatic declaration, because Taurus just doesn't move. Not without it feeling like a betrayal of something genuinely real inside you. So, Saturn showed you what was real. Chiron named the wound. Pluto set it in permanent form. Taurus stabilized the whole thing. 4 steps, 7 days. Each one stripped away a layer of structural support from the old version of how you'd been operating. By the time the full moon arrives tonight, the interior is already completely different. What the moon does is light the entire structure at once and make the gap between the new interior and the still unchanged exterior impossible to look away from. The opposition is exact at 10:11 p.m. Moon at 12 degrees Libra, Sun and Saturn at 12 degrees Aries. Same degree on both sides. A perfectly direct mirror, no offset, no blur. Both sides completely visible at the same moment. That's what an opposition actually is in astrology. One body staring directly at another across the maximum possible distance at full clarity. What the Libra moon sees when it looks across at Aries tonight is the entire structure this week assembled. And once seen, it's seen. The Libra moon is, at its core, about calibration, reading the room, adjusting, keeping things workable. The part of you that knows when to soften an edge and when to wait, that's real, and it isn't a flaw. But under a full moon, at peak illumination, what gets exposed is what's been running under that skill. Adjustment that has quietly become avoidance. Patience that functions more like delay. The careful version of yourself that appears whenever someone else is in the room. And on the other side of that mirror, Saturn in Aries. Aries alone is direction, impulse, forward motion. Saturn gives it architecture. What emerged from this week isn't some vague, wanting things to be different. It has a shape, a decision that has no exit clauses left in it, a limit that has been internally set and holds, a sense of what you want that Taurus has made solid. That's not a feeling anymore, that's a structure. 2 structures, directly opposed, neither soft enough to absorb the other. Neptune is sitting in Aries right now alongside the Sun and Saturn, and Neptune's whole job is to blur edges, to create just enough interpretive space for 2 incompatible things to seem like they might both be true with the right framing. On most days, Saturn and Neptune in the same sign is a livable tension. Saturn insisting on what's real, Neptune leaving a crack of light under the door. You can usually hold both and keep functioning. At 10:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, that door closes. Not because Neptune disappears, because when a full moon aligns exactly with Saturn in opposition, what gets amplified is Saturn, clarity, structure, reality without softening. Tonight the light falls on Saturn's form, not Neptune's blur. And what comes fully into view is the shape of who you've actually become, standing directly across from the presentation you've been maintaining. The pressure building all day is that opposition tightening, degree by degree. At 10:11 p.m. it closes completely. What arrives isn't a crisis, isn't a deadline. It's something both simpler and harder than either. Two paths, fully lit, equally real, with nothing left to look at instead. And immediately, the mind goes looking for a third one. Not deliberately. Nobody consciously decides to search for a middle path. It's a reflex, especially in someone who's spent years managing the distance between what they need and what others expect. A deeply practiced reflex, to find some framing that makes full commitment to either direction unnecessary. Is it really this clear-cut? Could both things still coexist with the right conditions? Maybe not deciding yet is the wise move. Libra is more wired for this reflex than any other sign, holding opposing things in suspension, refusing to close before every angle has been fully considered. That's the actual function. Under most conditions, it's a genuine strength, not avoidance. Tonight, it runs directly into the wall of a sign that simply doesn't do suspension. Aries moves, Saturn in Aries moves, and then holds its shape. When the full moon lights up Libra at full brightness, every tendency toward balance and delay fully expressed. What it's reflecting across the axis is a structure with zero flex. The week of March 25th didn't build something with optional clauses. It built a position. The third option isn't being withheld tonight. It structurally doesn't exist. Here's exactly why. When Venus settled into Taurus on March 30th, the new desires and values stopped being directional, a general sense of where you're headed, and became positional, fixed ground. And Taurus doesn't move off its position without that feeling like a betrayal of something you genuinely know to be real. The old role and the new interior aren't two preferences that could be averaged together. They're two formed, stable, incompatible things. They can't share one space. Full moons don't manufacture incompatibility. They reveal it. What you're experiencing tonight isn't the moon doing something to you. It's the moon removing the conditions that let you keep looking slightly to the side of what was already undeniably true. Here's what this means in practice. Tonight doesn't require action. What it delivers is visibility, not a deadline. Seeing both paths clearly is different from needing to answer both paths before midnight. The choice becomes concrete tonight. The actual answer to that choice happens in specific conversations, specific moments, specific things you stop pretending are fine. And those unfold over days, not in the next few hours. But something does change permanently after tonight. Anyone who tries to slide back toward the middle after this full moon, back to still figuring it out, still maintaining both versions at once, will find the middle isn't where it was. The structure Saturn built on March 28th doesn't compress under social pressure. The stability Taurus gave the new position doesn't dissolve because someone still expects the old version of you. Every time you try to wear the old role from this point forward, it costs more than it did last week. The seams are showing. You'll feel them even when nobody else does yet. That's not a warning. It's just the honest description of the terrain. Both paths are visible. Neither is a trap, but they're not the same. They don't lead to the same place and they don't cost the same thing going forward. The first path is making the interior exterior, not all at once. That's not how any of this actually works in real life. It starts with one specific thing, one conversation that happens in the new register instead of the old one. One limit stated out loud instead of managed in your head. One arrangement you stop pretending is functional when you've known for a while that it isn't. That's the full scope of the first step, not a complete life overhaul before the end of the week, one moment where the inside and the outside finally match. Between now and April 9th, Venus forms a sextile to the North Node. The North Node is a directional marker. It shows where movement carries natural support rather than running against resistance. Venus in Taurus sextile the North Node means the new desires and values that landed on March 30th are already oriented toward that direction. A step taken toward the first path inside this window has something working with it, not against it. Internal structure and directional support temporarily lined up, which makes the first action easier to take and easier to hold once made. That window opens tonight just after 10:11 p.m. The second path, returning to the old role, is available. It won't be a catastrophe, but it carries weight. It didn't carry 2 weeks ago. Weight you now feel physically rather than just mentally. Every time you reshape what you say to match what someone expects from the previous version of you, there's a gap between what came out and what was actually there. Not guilt, not judgment, just friction. The physical cost of performing a shape that no longer matches the interior. Taurus doesn't flex back without effort. The new position is stable. Acting against it takes something that acting with it simply doesn't. That's the actual asymmetry. Mercury moves into Aries in the days just after this full moon. Mercury governs how you put things into words, and Aries is direct speech. No preamble, no padding, no engineering required. If the words for starting the first path have felt just slightly out of reach, a way to say what's true without having to construct it carefully from the ground up, that changes. Not as a revelation, as a natural shift in register that makes direct statement feel less effortful than it has. The first path doesn't ask for the full conversation tonight. It just asks you to stop performing like that conversation isn't coming. The second path stays open. But every day past this full moon without movement toward the first one, the old role costs a little more to wear, and the seams become visible to more people than just you. The full moon put 3 specific things in the room tonight. Not themes, not general areas of life. 3 things you already know, because the week of March 25th named them one by one, and tonight made it impossible to look anywhere else. The first is a decision. The one Saturn clarified on the 25th. It may not require another person to know about it or agree to it immediately, but it's the one where the answer is already settled internally, while the outside is still performing uncertainty. The full moon lit that gap directly. The decision is made. The exterior just hasn't updated. The second is a person, or a specific dynamic with a person. Venus Chiron on the 26th named it. You know who. You know what the arrangement actually is versus what you've been calling it. Tonight added no new information about this. It removed the conditions that were letting you keep that information comfortably in the background. The third is a pattern, something you've been doing in how you respond, in what you agree to, in what you let pass without comment, that you've been mentally filing under normal, even though it crossed into not actually okay somewhere in the last several weeks. Not a dramatic rupture, a quiet ongoing thing that this week finally made impossible to keep labeling as fine. None of these 3 need answering tonight. Tonight is the visibility. The answers happen in actual places, in actual exchanges over the days that follow. One conversation. One thing said out loud instead of kept internal. One thing you stop performing as though it still reflects who you are. The window between now and April 9th, Venus sextile the North Node, is when those answers have the most support behind them. Direction, desire, and internal structure all pointing the same way. A step taken toward the first path here isn't a step taken against resistance. It's a step taken with what's already moving. What makes everything happen faster than you'd expect isn't urgency. It's simpler. You stop spending energy on maintenance, on holding 2 incompatible states together, keeping the seams invisible, managing the gap. That energy doesn't disappear. It redirects. And the first real step doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like putting down something heavy you'd been carrying so long you genuinely forgot you were carrying it. After 10:11 p.m., as the moon begins to pull away from the opposition, tonight's acute pressure softens. That's not the choice becoming less real. That's the choice shifting from confrontation into consequence. What you do in the next 8 days is the actual answer to everything tonight asked. The old role is still there. You can pick it back up. But it fits differently now. The seams that were invisible this morning aren't anymore. What got forced into the open tonight still has to be answered. In one conversation, one boundary, one thing you stop pretending is fine. That part starts now, and it moves faster than you think. Subscribe and stay close.